A millionaire sees his childhood love begging with two 3-year-old twin children and recognizes her, but what he does next is unbelievable. Before we start the story, comment below which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Logan Bennett, a ruthless millionaire, was crossing a busy street corner. He stopped at a traffic light, waiting for the pedestrian signal to change when a faint, fragile voice broke through the chatter of the busy streets. "Please, just a little help for my girls," a woman murmured, her voice laced with exhaustion. Something about that voice sent a strange chill down Logan's spine. He turned his head slightly, his sharp eyes scanning the sidewalk. There, huddled against the cold concrete, sat a woman wrapped in a torn, oversized coat, her arms wrapped protectively around two small girls. The children, twin girls no older than 4, clung to her as if she was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. One of them quietly sobbed, rubbing her tiny fists against her eyes, while the other gripped her mother's arm, her wide eyes filled with fear. Logan felt his chest tighten at the sight. "Why do I feel like I know her?" The woman had her head lowered, strands of tangled, dirt-streaked hair falling over her face, shielding her from the eyes of the strangers who hurried past. People glanced at her and looked away, as if poverty was something they didn't want to see. And yet, Logan couldn't look away. There was something eerily familiar about her. As if sensing his gaze, the woman slowly lifted her face, and the moment their eyes met, Logan's heart slammed against his ribs. It was Olivia Carter. For a second, time froze. His mind reeled back years into the past, to a time when Olivia was the shining star of his high school. Confident, beautiful, untouchable. The girl he had secretly admired from afar, and the girl who had barely acknowledged his existence, except to mock him. And now, here she was, on the sidewalk, broken, vulnerable, unrecognizable. Logan's fingers clenched into a fist, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar. Pity? Anger? Disbelief? The pedestrian signal turned green, and people rushed forward, but Logan didn't move. "Olivia?" His voice came out lower than he intended, hesitant yet filled with shock. The woman's entire body stiffened. Slowly, she turned toward him, and the moment her eyes met his, she went completely still. Her lips parted slightly, her hands tightened around the twins. And then, without a word, she lowered her gaze in shame. Olivia's shoulders hunched forward as if she wished the earth would swallow her whole. She clutched her daughters closer, her fingers gripping their small, fragile bodies, as if they were her only anchor to reality. She didn't respond. She didn't even look up again. Logan stepped closer, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He couldn't ignore the sight before him. His first love, the girl who once ruled the school halls with confidence, now reduced to a beggar on the streets. "Olivia," he repeated, his voice firmer this time. Still no answer. His eyes swept over her, taking in the tattered coat she wore, thin, barely enough to keep warm in the chilly evening air. Her jeans were worn out, frayed at the ends, her shoes caked with dried mud. The twins shivered, their tiny hands gripping their mother's sleeves, seeking comfort. Logan felt something heavy settle in his chest. This couldn't be real. He crouched down, leveling his gaze with hers. "What happened to you?" Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line, her jaw tightening. She still refused to look at him. Instead, she whispered, "Go away, Logan." Her voice was weak, yet filled with defiance. Logan's brows furrowed. She was ashamed, but he wouldn't let this go. Before he could respond, one of the twins, her tiny frame barely visible beneath the oversized sweater she wore, let out a small whimper. "Mommy, I'm hungry." The words hit Logan like a punch to the gut. Olivia tensed, her fingers trembling as she stroked her daughter's messy curls. "Sweetheart, just a little longer," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Mommy will find something." Logan sucked in a breath, his fists clenching at his sides. No, he wasn't walking away from this. He couldn't. Without thinking, he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his wallet. Before he could offer anything, Olivia's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with fury. "Don't," she hissed, her voice sharp despite its weakness. I don't need your money. Logan froze. This woman, the same Olivia who once lived in a world of privilege and confidence, was now sitting on a sidewalk with her starving children. Yet she still had pride left in her. He respected that, but it wouldn't change his decision. Logan exhaled slowly, studying her closely. Her hands shook slightly, whether from cold, hunger, or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. But her body language screamed one thing: desperation. She was hanging on by a thread, and he wasn't going to let her fall. Pulling out his phone, Logan pressed a button and brought it to his ear. Get the car here. Now. Olivia's head snapped up again. What are you doing? I'm taking you and the girls with me. No, she said instantly, her arms tightening around the twins. We don't need. I didn't ask. His voice was final, unwavering. Her defensive stance wavered for the first time, her breath hitching. The twin who had spoken earlier sniffled, rubbing at her tired eyes. The other one, more reserved, peeked up at Logan with wide, fearful eyes. And in that moment he made a promise to himself. They would never have to beg again. A sleek, black car pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the dim streetlights. Logan rose to his full height, towering over Olivia as he extended a hand. Get in. Olivia shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. I can't. You can, Logan said firmly. And you will. She swallowed hard, her gaze shifting toward the girls, who stared longingly at the warm car. Logan softened his tone, sensing her hesitation. I won't hurt you, Olivia. Her lip trembled, and finally, with shaking fingers, she took his hand. Logan helped her up, then bent down and gently lifted one of the twins into his arms. The child flinched at first, but when she realized his grip was strong and steady, not threatening, she buried her face into his shoulder. Olivia held the other girl tightly, pressing a kiss to her messy hair. With slow, hesitant steps, she climbed into the car. Logan slid in beside them, closing the door behind him. As the driver pulled away from the curb, Logan stole a glance at Olivia, who stared out the window, her arms protectively wrapped around her daughters. Her face was unreadable, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The car ride was silent, except for the soft breathing of the twins, who had quickly drifted into an exhausted sleep. Olivia sat stiffly, her arms protectively wrapped around her daughters, her gaze locked on the city lights flashing past the tinted windows. She had no idea where Logan was taking them, but she wasn't sure she had the strength to resist anymore. When the car slowed to a stop, Olivia lifted her head, her breath catching in her throat. Before her stood an enormous mansion, its towering structure bathed in the glow of golden lights. The wrought iron gates had opened silently to welcome them, and beyond the pristine front yard, a grand entryway with carved oak doors loomed before them. Olivia's chest tightened. This wasn't just a home. This was wealth, power, a world she didn't belong to. The door to the car opened, and Logan stepped out first, offering his hand to her. Olivia hesitated before carefully climbing out, adjusting her grip on the twin still in her arms. The second twin stirred in Logan's arms, blinking up at him sleepily. Logan looked down at the child, and for the first time in years, something inside him softened in a way he couldn't quite explain. As they stepped up to the grand entrance, the massive doors swung open, revealing a neatly dressed older woman. Mrs. Harper, Logan's longtime housekeeper and the closest thing he had to family. Mrs. Harper's eyes widened slightly at the sight before her, but she said nothing, her years of working for the wealthy training her well in discretion. Instead, she simply gave a polite nod. Mr. Bennett, she greeted. Her sharp gaze flickered to Olivia, taking in her tired expression and the sleeping children in their arms. Prepare a room for them, Logan ordered without hesitation, and have the kitchen make something light for them to eat. Mrs. Harper hesitated only a moment before nodding. Right away, sir. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, her grip tightening around her daughters. Logan, this isn't necessary. It is. His voice left no room for argument. You and the girls need food, warmth, and rest. You're staying here tonight, She opened her mouth, as if to protest. But then the twin in her arms let out a small whimper, burying her face into Olivia's shoulder. She was too tired to fight. The moment Olivia stepped inside, she felt like an outsider in a world she had no right to enter. The marble floors gleamed beneath the grand chandelier hanging from the ceiling. A fireplace crackled in the living room, casting a warm golden glow against the high ceilings and polished furniture. The twins, now fully awake, gasped in awe. Their small, dirt-covered fingers clutched Olivia's sleeves as their wide eyes drank in the warmth and beauty around them. They had never seen anything like this. A young maid approached hesitantly, carrying a tray of freshly washed clothes. "Sir, I prepared some warm clothes for the children," she said, her voice soft. Olivia stiffened, instinctively holding her girls closer. She wasn't used to kindness. Logan sensed her hesitation. "Take them," he said gently. "They're just clothes, Olivia." Her lips pressed together, but after a moment, she gave a small nod and took the bundle. Mrs. Harper led them to the dining area, where a simple but delicious meal had been prepared: warm soup, soft bread, and freshly cut fruit. Olivia hadn't realized how hungry she was until she smelled the food. But before she could even lift a spoon, the twins lunged at their plates, stuffing small bites into their mouths with trembling hands. The sight punched Logan in the gut. They were starving. They weren't just hungry from today. They were hungry from days, weeks, maybe months of not having enough. He watched as Olivia sat silently, her own spoon untouched, her gaze locked on her daughters as if watching them eat was enough to satisfy her. Something inside him burned with quiet rage. He had spent years building an empire, making millions, living in luxury, while she had been out there suffering. How the hell had this happened? After dinner, Mrs. Harper led Olivia and the twins to a guest room, far more lavish than anything Olivia had ever known. The moment they were inside, the girls rushed toward the giant bed, their tiny bodies sinking into the soft mattress. A deep sigh escaped Olivia's lips as she watched them, her shoulders sagging in exhaustion. For the first time in years, her daughters were safe. She turned toward the door and froze when she saw Logan standing there, watching her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Finally, Logan stepped inside and sank onto the chair near the fireplace, his sharp eyes scanning her carefully. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to know the truth." Olivia's throat tightened. She knew this was coming. She knew Logan would demand to know how she had fallen so far. And deep down, a part of her wanted to tell him. But shame clung to her like a second skin. She nodded slightly, refusing to meet his gaze. "Tomorrow." Logan studied her for a moment longer before nodding. He didn't press her further. He simply stood up, glanced at the twins once more, and left, closing the door behind him. That night, Olivia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The bed was warm. The sheets smelled fresh. The air wasn't damp or cold. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt lost. What was she doing here? She had spent years keeping her walls up, surviving alone, depending on no one. And yet here she was in Logan Bennett's house under his roof, relying on his kindness. A man who had once been a distant memory. A man who had every reason to turn his back on her. And yet he hadn't. She turned to the side, watching her daughters sleep peacefully for the first time in months. They looked happy, safe, content. Her heart clenched. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. Maybe tomorrow, she would finally tell Logan the truth. The morning sun spilled through the massive windows, painting golden streaks across the marble floor of Logan's mansion. The warmth should have been comforting, but Olivia felt nothing but dread. She knew today would come. The truth had been buried for too long. She sat stiffly at the breakfast table, her fingers curled around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Across from her, Logan leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. The twins, Harper and Hazel, were giggling in the other room, playing with the housekeeper, Mrs. Harper. Their laughter should have been a relief, but instead, it made the silence between Olivia and Logan even heavier. Finally, Logan spoke. "Tell me what happened." His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, a quiet urgency. Olivia swallowed, her throat dry. It's a long story, Logan. I have time. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the porcelain mug. The words sat like a weight in her chest, but she forced herself to push past the shame, past the regret. And then, finally, she spoke. A love that turned to betrayal. After high school, I fell in love with Jake Miller. She said the name carefully, watching Logan's reaction. His jaw tightened slightly, but he stayed silent. You remember him, don't you? The golden boy, the one everyone adored. Logan let out a slow breath. Of course, he remembered Jake. Jake had been the kind of guy who walked through life without consequences. Handsome, wealthy, charismatic. The one who had it all, and took what he wanted without a second thought. Olivia's fingers trembled slightly as she continued. I thought he loved me. He told me he did. She gave a hollow laugh, shaking her head. We started dating after prom. It was fast, intense. I was naive enough to believe every lie he told me. Then, one day, I found out I was pregnant. Logan's grip tightened around his coffee mug, but he said nothing, letting her continue. I told Jake, expecting him to step up, to be there for me. She looked away, blinking hard. Instead, he laughed. A sharp breath left Logan's lips. He told me he wasn't ready, that he had plans for his future and I wasn't part of them. Olivia's voice shook. Then he just left. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to keep going, to rip the bandage off. At first, I told myself I'd be okay, that I could do it alone. But reality hit fast. She laced her fingers together, staring down at them. My parents weren't exactly supportive. They didn't throw me out, but they made it clear they couldn't afford another mouth to feed. I had no job, no money, no plan. Logan stayed quiet, his expression unreadable. I worked wherever I could, but jobs don't come easy when you're pregnant and barely out of high school. I made just enough to survive. Until I didn't. She took a shuddering breath. When the twins were 2, I lost everything. Couldn't pay rent. We were evicted. One day we had a home. The next, we were sleeping under a bridge. Logan's hands curled into tight fists. For 2 years, Logan. 2 years. I did everything I could to keep them safe. Her voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes. I begged. I worked odd jobs where I could. Some nights, I skipped meals just so Harper and Hazel could eat. But it was never enough. No one hires a homeless woman with 2 kids. Logan breathed in sharply, trying to keep his anger at bay. Not at Olivia, but at the world that had let this happen. Jake. At the man who had ruined her life and walked away without consequences. Silence stretched between them. Olivia finally wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. I don't want your pity, Logan. I've had enough of that from strangers who drop a few coins into my hands just to make themselves feel better. Her voice was stronger now, her gaze steady. I'm still standing. And I'm still fighting. Logan's throat tightened. This woman in front of him, this wasn't the girl he had known in high school. She had been broken, shattered, but she had never given up. And damn it, she deserved more than survival. He leaned forward, his voice calm but filled with something powerful. You don't need pity, Olivia. She frowned slightly, taken aback. You need justice. Olivia blinked, confused. Logan's next words sent a shiver down her spine. And I'm going to make sure you get it. The morning air was crisp, filtering through the towering windows of Logan's mansion. Olivia sat on the edge of the plush guest room bed, watching as Harper and Hazel played on the carpet, their soft giggles filling the once quiet space. They were safe, warm. For the first time in years, Olivia didn't have to worry about where their next meal would come from. And yet, unease still clung to her. This wasn't their home. This wasn't their life. Not yet. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Logan. He stood in the doorway, his sharp eyes softer than usual, as if carefully assessing her emotions. Breakfast is ready, he said simply. The girls will love it. Harper and Hazel immediately jumped to their feet, their faces lighting up with excitement as they rushed past him, their tiny feet patting against the sleek wooden floors. Olivia rose slowly, her hands twisting together. Logan, I need to talk to you. His expression didn't change, but she caught the faintest flicker of understanding in his gaze. I was about to say the same thing. Breakfast was unlike anything Olivia had experienced in years. A lavish spread of fresh fruit, warm pastries, eggs, and juice covered the dining table. The twins ate enthusiastically, their small hands grabbing bits of bread and fruit, their eyes shining with joy. Logan, however, barely touched his food. He was watching Olivia, waiting, and finally, when the twins were distracted, he spoke. You and the girls are staying here. Olivia froze mid-bite, swallowing hard. Logan, it's not up for debate. His voice was calm but firm. She looked down at her plate, a familiar knot forming in her stomach. I appreciate everything you've done for us, truly, but I don't want to be a burden. Logan leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled together. You're not a burden, Olivia. You and the girls deserve a real life. Stability, safety. Her heart pounded against her ribs. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering them a second chance. And it terrified her. Logan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. I've already taken care of a few things. Olivia tensed. What do you mean? The girls need proper education. I've arranged for them to be enrolled in a good school nearby. Olivia's chest tightened. A school. A real school, not just the makeshift lessons she had tried to give them on the streets. Logan. That's too much. It's necessary. He cut her off smoothly. They deserve the best. And so do you. She shook her head, the weight of everything crushing her. I don't even have a job. I can't afford. That's the second thing, Logan interrupted again. She blinked. I've arranged for a nanny. Olivia's eyes widened. A nanny? Yes. Someone to help take care of the girls while you focus on getting back on your feet. Olivia opened her mouth to protest, but Logan wasn't done. And I have a position at my company that would be a perfect fit for you. She froze. The words felt unreal. A job. Not another dead-end minimum wage gig, but a real career opportunity. Her fingers trembled. Logan was offering her everything she had fought for. A home, education for the twins, and a way to rebuild her life. But could she accept it? Could she truly let someone help her after years of struggling alone? Olivia took a deep breath, her hands clenching into fists beneath the table. Logan. She exhaled slowly, her voice shaking. I can't just take all this from you. Logan studied her carefully, his gaze sharp but unreadable. Why? She swallowed. Because I need to do this on my own. You have done it on your own. His voice was low, but insistent. You've fought harder than anyone I've ever met. But tell me, Olivia, when is it enough? She looked away, her throat tightening. He leaned forward, his next words hitting her like a punch to the gut. You can keep struggling, keep fighting. But what about them? Her eyes snapped back to his. This isn't just about you anymore. She sucked in a sharp breath. Harper and Hazel. They deserved better. They deserved more than the streets, more than hunger, more than sleepless nights in the cold. And Logan was giving them that. Her pride was no longer worth more than their future. Olivia exhaled, defeated but relieved. All right. Logan arched a brow. All right, I'll stay, and I'll take the job. For the first time since the conversation started, Logan's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. Good. Olivia held up a hand before he could speak again. But I will repay you, Logan. He tilted his head slightly. That's not necessary. It is to me. Her voice was firm. I won't take this for granted. I'll pay back every cent. Logan studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Fine. Have it your way. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, the weight of the decision settling in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't drowning. Like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. That night, as Olivia tucked the twins into bed, she felt something shift in the air. Harper, the more outgoing of the two, looked up at her with sleepy eyes. Mommy, she mumbled, are we gonna stay here forever? Olivia froze, her heart clenching. Hazel, usually the quieter twin, grabbed Olivia's hand, her voice barely above a whisper. I like Mr. Logan. A lump formed in Olivia's throat. They were already warming up to him. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was becoming something more. Olivia kissed their foreheads, smoothing their hair back. We'll see, sweetheart. For now, we're safe. She rose, switching off the lamp and walking toward the door. Before she left, she paused in the doorway, looking back at her daughters, already snuggled beneath the blankets. And then, for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had finally found a place to belong. Logan sat in his home office, staring at the name on his screen. Jake Miller. Even after all these years, the name boiled his blood. After hearing Olivia's story, he had silently made a decision. He needed to confront the man who had shattered her life and walked away without consequences. It hadn't taken much effort to track Jake down. He was still in the city, living comfortably, working a high-paying job, and enjoying a privileged life. A life he had built while Olivia and his daughters had been starving on the streets. Logan clenched his jaw. It was time to pay Jake Miller a visit. The bar was upscale, filled with wealthy executives and polished conversations. Logan spotted him immediately. Jake Miller sat at a booth near the back, his arm casually draped around a stunning woman, laughing as he swirled a glass of expensive whiskey. He looked exactly the same, cocky, charming, and completely unaware of the damage he had left behind. Logan felt something dark coil inside him. This man had abandoned his children, and he hadn't looked back. Logan crossed the room in long, determined strides before stopping beside Jake's table. Jake barely glanced up, his smile still in place. Can I help you? Logan's expression was stone cold. We need to talk. Jake blinked at him, his grin faltering slightly. Then, something clicked in his memory, and his eyes narrowed. Wait, Bennett? Logan Bennett? He let out a laugh, shaking his head. Well damn. Haven't seen you since high school. What's with the death stare? Logan ignored the fake pleasantries, his voice dangerously low. I know what you did to Olivia. Jake's brows lifted, amusement flickering in his gaze. Olivia Carter? He chuckled, leaning back in his seat. Man, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Logan's fists curled at his sides. Jake smirked, tilting his glass slightly. Let me guess. She's crying about how I left? How unfair life is. He shrugged, completely unbothered. Look, she got pregnant. That was her problem, not mine. Logan snapped. Before he could think, before Jake could blink, Logan's fist slammed into his jaw, sending the whiskey glass shattering against the table. Jake stumbled backward, cursing, gripping the edge of the booth. The woman beside him screamed, grabbing her purse and scrambling away from the scene. Jake touched his lip, wincing as he pulled back his hand, now smeared with blood. He looked up, his gaze shifting from shock to fury. What the hell is wrong with you? Logan took a step closer, his voice low and lethal. You abandoned her. You left her to rot while you walked away without a second thought. Jake snorted, wiping his lip. And what? You're here to play the hero? You always had that pathetic nice guy syndrome, didn't you? Logan's jaw tightened dangerously. She was living on the streets, Jake. Your daughters were starving. For a brief moment, something flickered in Jake's expression. Then he laughed. Logan felt his entire body stiffen. Not my problem, Jake said smoothly. He reached for a napkin, dabbing at his lip. She should have been smarter. I told her I wasn't ready for that responsibility. Not my fault she didn't listen. Logan's fury turned ice cold. Jake had no remorse, no guilt. He would never change. Logan should have expected that. But somehow, hearing it out loud, it still disgusted him. He took a slow breath, pushing back the urge to break Jake's nose. Instead, he leaned down, his voice like a blade. Stay far away from Olivia and the twins. If I ever hear you come near them, I will personally make sure you regret it. Jake simply smirked, his arrogance unwavering. Relax, Bennett. I don't want her, and I sure as hell don't want those kids. Logan's stomach twisted with disgust. This man would never care, never change. And for the first time, Logan knew Olivia deserved to hear it for herself. When Logan got home, he found Olivia sitting on the couch, flipping through a book. She glanced up when she saw him, her brows furrowing at his stormy expression. "Something wrong?" she asked carefully. Logan hesitated, then walked over, lowering himself into the chair across from her. He sighed. "I found Jake." Olivia's entire body tensed. Her grip on the book tightened. She stared at him for a long moment before finally whispering, "And..." Logan hesitated, debating how much to tell her. She deserved closure. He took a breath. "He doesn't care, Olivia." Her face didn't change, but he saw it, the way her fingers trembled slightly. "I needed to hear that," she murmured. Then, to his surprise, she reached for her phone. Logan's brows knitted together. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. Instead, she dialed a number. A few rings later, a voice answered. "Jake." There was silence on Olivia's end. Then her voice, quiet but strong. "Jake, it's me." Logan watched her closely, noting the tension in her shoulders. There was a pause. Then Jake sighed heavily. "What do you want, Olivia?" Her fingers tightened around the phone. "I want to know why." A beat of silence. Then Jake chuckled just as he had at the bar. "Why?" Another pause. Then, his voice dripped with indifference. "Because I moved on. And you should too." Logan's stomach turned. But Olivia's face was calm. She let out a slow breath. Then, she did something Logan didn't expect. She smiled. A small, bittersweet, heartbreaking smile. "You know what, Jake? You're right." Then, before Jake could say anything else, she hung up. The silence that followed was heavy. But Olivia, she looked lighter, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally lifted. She turned to Logan, her eyes clear and steady. "I'm done looking back." And for the first time in a long, long time, she meant it. The atmosphere in Logan's office was different from what Olivia had imagined. She had spent years working dead-end jobs, barely scraping by, but this was an entirely new world. Bennett Enterprises wasn't just a company. It was an empire, a massive corporation spanning multiple industries, built from the ground up by the man who had taken her and the twins in without a second thought. And now Olivia was a part of it. As she sat at her new desk, a sleek workstation positioned just outside Logan's office, she felt a sense of nervous excitement. Her official role? Project assistant to the CEO. To Logan, it was a steep learning curve. The workload was demanding, the expectations high, but Olivia threw herself into the work. Logan was patient but firm, never cutting her slack, never treating her as anything other than a professional. And for that, Olivia was grateful. She didn't want special treatment. She wanted to earn her place. Weeks passed, and Olivia settled into her role. She learned how Logan ran his company, how he commanded respect in meetings, how his decisions could shift entire markets. And she learned something else, too. Logan was different with her. With others, he was ruthless, cold, calculated, always in control. But with her, he softened. She noticed it in the way he lingered near her desk, asking if she needed help when she never did. In the way his eyes flickered with something unreadable whenever she laughed at his rare jokes. In the way his voice lowered whenever he spoke her name. And that scared her, because she was beginning to feel something too. And that terrified her more than anything. Then, one afternoon, it happened. A notification buzzed on her phone. She glanced at it absent-mindedly, expecting it to be a reminder for an upcoming meeting. But then she froze. A photo of Logan with a woman. They were at a restaurant, seated close, laughing over dinner. And beneath the image, a message. "Do you really know who he is?" Olivia's breath hitched. Her stomach twisted, a sinking feeling washing over her. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Who sent this? Why? Was Logan just playing with her feelings? Olivia had spent too many years being hurt to ignore something like this. So she marched straight into Logan's office, the phone gripped tightly in her hand. He was behind his desk, reviewing a report, but the moment she entered, his sharp eyes lifted to meet hers. His brows furrowed slightly. Something wrong? Olivia took a steady breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She set her phone down in front of him, the screen still glowing with the photo. Who is she? Logan glanced down at the screen. His expression didn't change. He picked up the phone, studied the image for a second, then sighed. This was a business meeting. His tone was matter-of-fact, but Olivia had spent enough time around men like Jake to know how easy it was for someone to lie. Her arms folded across her chest. A business meeting that looks like a date? Logan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady, unreadable. She's an international investor. We were discussing a potential merger. Olivia wanted to believe him, but her past clawed at her. Men lied. She had believed in Jake once, believed in his love, in his promises. And where had that gotten her? On the streets, begging for scraps to keep her daughters alive. Logan's gaze didn't waver. He didn't defend himself unnecessarily. He didn't try to charm his way out of it. He simply unlocked his phone, swiped through his emails, and turned the screen toward her. Olivia hesitated before glancing at it. Her eyes scanned the messages, official correspondence between Logan and the investor, confirming their meeting was strictly business. Then he handed her his call logs. She skimmed through them, seeing nothing out of place. Finally, he slid a company document across the desk, an official contract with the woman's name attached. A real investor, a real deal, a real business dinner. Not a date, not a betrayal. Logan sat back, watching as Olivia processed the evidence. Then he spoke. If you think I'd play games with you, then you don't know me at all. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was just disappointed. And that hit harder than anything. Olivia felt ashamed. Logan had never given her a reason to doubt him. Not once. And yet, the moment a shadow of suspicion appeared, she had been ready to believe it. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. I'm sorry. Logan stayed silent. She looked at him, her heart tight in her chest. I'm not used to people being honest with me. She swallowed hard. I'm used to lies, to people leaving, to men saying one thing and doing another. Logan leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. I'm not them, Olivia. She knew that. God, she knew that. And yet, old wounds weren't so easy to forget. She took a deep breath, then did something she wasn't used to doing. She reached out, placing her hand over his. The warmth of his skin sent an unfamiliar jolt through her. His gaze flickered down to their joined hands, then back to her face. Olivia licked her lips, suddenly nervous. I need to learn how to trust again, she admitted softly. Logan's thumb brushed against her knuckles, the touch light but grounding. Then let me show you how. Olivia didn't pull away this time. Instead, for the first time in years, she let someone hold on to her. The evening air was crisp as Olivia stepped onto the terrace of Logan's mansion. The city skyline stretched before her, the twinkling lights mirroring the restless storm inside her chest. Behind her, the mansion was quiet. Harper and Hazel were fast asleep, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia felt at peace. But peace didn't mean certainty. She wrapped her arms around herself, lost in thought. Then, she felt him before she heard him. Logan stepped beside her, his presence strong yet steady, like an anchor. He didn't say anything at first, just gazed out at the city, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. Finally, after a long moment, he spoke. You and the twins have changed my life. Olivia's breath hitched. She turned to him slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs. Logan's gaze met hers. Intense, unwavering. No hesitation, no doubts. Before you came into my life, everything was about business, about success, about making sure I never felt small again. His jaw tensed, as if recalling the ghosts of his past. I thought I had everything, but I didn't. He looked at her then, and Olivia felt like she couldn't breathe. Then I found you, and suddenly, everything I thought mattered didn't. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to say she felt the same, because she did. But fear clung to her like a second skin. Olivia had spent years believing love was just another trap waiting to break her. She had loved Jake once. She had believed his words, his promises, his affection. And look where that had gotten her. Broken. Homeless. Fighting every day to keep her daughters alive. She couldn't survive that kind of heartbreak again. And Logan? Logan was good. Too good. He had already done more for her than any man ever had. And that terrified her. Because what if she let herself believe in him? What if she let herself hope? And what if, one day, he changed his mind? She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan, I don't know how to do this. His expression softened, and he took a careful step closer. Then we won't rush. Her lips parted, unsure what to say. Logan reached for her hand, his fingers brushing over hers. I'll wait for you, Olivia. His voice was steady. However long it takes. She let out a slow, shaky breath. He wasn't pressuring her. He wasn't demanding answers. He was just there, waiting, ready whenever she was. And that, more than anything, made her chest ache. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. Days passed, and something shifted between them. Logan didn't push. He didn't mention his confession again. Instead, he stayed. He became part of their routine, slipping into their lives as if he had always belonged. Mornings started with the twins running to the kitchen, climbing onto Logan's lap as he pretended to struggle under their weight. Afternoons were filled with Harper and Hazel playing in the mansion's garden, laughing as Logan chased them around like a giant monster. Evenings were warm, soft conversations over dinner, Logan helping the twins with their bedtime stories, while Olivia watched from the doorway. And slowly, Olivia started to let her guard down, because Logan wasn't going anywhere. He was there for her daughters. He was there for her, and that realization scared her and comforted her all at once. One afternoon, Olivia stood in the doorway, watching something she never expected to see. Harper and Hazel sat on the floor, crayons scattered everywhere, their little faces scrunched in concentration. Across from them, Logan sat cross-legged, carefully holding up one of their drawings. I think this is the best one yet, he said seriously, inspecting Harper's unevenly drawn house. Harper giggled. That's our house. You live there too, right, Mr. Logan? Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Logan hesitated just for a second before smiling. Yeah, sweetheart. I guess I do. Hazel tilted her head. Does that mean you're kinda like our daddy? Olivia's heart stopped. Logan blinked, looking between the two girls, as if carefully choosing his words. Then he reached out and ruffled Hazel's hair gently. I'd like that, he admitted softly. If it's okay with you. Harper beamed, throwing her little arms around his neck. You're the bestest. Logan chuckled, holding her close, his eyes flickering toward Olivia. And when their gazes met, something unspoken passed between them. Promise. A silent understanding. And for the first time in a long, long time, Olivia wasn't afraid of the future. Because maybe, just maybe, she had already found the place she belonged. The night was still, the city skyline twinkling like a sea of diamonds below. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself as she stepped onto the rooftop terrace of Logan's mansion, the gentle breeze brushing against her skin. She had never been up here before, but the moment she arrived, she understood. This place was special. Unlike the grandeur of the rest of the mansion, the rooftop was intimate, a space where the world felt quiet. A soft glow from lanterns lit the seating area, and the scent of fresh roses filled the air. Logan stood near the edge, gazing out at the city. His posture was relaxed, but there was something in the way his fingers tapped lightly against the balcony railing that told Olivia he was nervous. Logan Bennett nervous? That alone sent a ripple of anticipation through her. As if sensing her presence, he turned, his sharp blue eyes locking onto hers. And then he smiled, that rare, genuine smile that she was starting to realize was reserved only for her. You came. Olivia nodded, stepping forward. I had a feeling this wasn't just an ordinary invitation. He let out a soft chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. No, it's not. He gestured toward a small table set up in the center of the rooftop. A bottle of champagne, 2 glasses, and a single red rose resting on a folded napkin. Olivia's heart thudded. Whatever was happening tonight, it was important. Logan took a deep breath before finally speaking. "There's something I've been wanting to say for a while now." Olivia's fingers curled into her palms. "Logan," he shook his head, taking a step closer. "Let me finish." She swallowed hard, nodding. His gaze softened, his voice quieter now. "When I first saw you that night on the street, I didn't just see an old memory. I saw the strongest woman I have ever known." Her breath hitched. "I thought I had everything, Olivia. Money, power, a life most people dream about." He exhaled, shaking his head. "But then I found you again. And suddenly, none of it meant anything without you." Her chest tightened. "You and the girls." His voice grew rough with emotion. "You changed me. You made me realize what I was missing. And now, I don't just want to help you, Olivia." He reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "I want to be with you. Forever." Her lips parted in shock, her pulse racing. Logan took a slow step back, reaching into his pocket. And then he pulled out a small velvet box. Olivia's breath caught. No, he couldn't be. The world around her blurred as Logan slowly got down on one knee. The rooftop was silent, save for the soft rustling of the wind. Logan flipped open the box, and inside, nestled in deep velvet, was a stunning diamond ring. Not flashy, not overly extravagant, but elegant, thoughtful, perfect. Her perfect ring. "Olivia Carter," Logan said, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had never let herself imagine this. Never thought that after everything. After the pain, the heartbreak, the struggle, there could be something beautiful waiting for her. Waiting for them. Her mind screamed at her that this was too fast. Too much. But her heart told her that for the first time in years, she wasn't scared. She wasn't alone. She was loved. Her eyes welled up as she gazed down at Logan, the man who had saved her without asking for anything in return. And suddenly, the answer was the easiest thing in the world. Yes, the word slipped from her lips before she could second-guess herself. Logan's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't let himself hope too much. Then he smiled. A smile so real, so full of love, that Olivia's chest ached. He stood, cupping her face gently, his thumb brushing away the single tear that escaped down her cheek. "You mean it?" he murmured. She let out a watery laugh, nodding. "Yes, Logan. I mean it." A deep exhale left his chest, as if he had been holding his breath all this time. Then, without hesitation, he slipped the ring onto her finger. Fit perfectly, and when he pulled her into his arms, she didn't hesitate. She melted into his embrace, feeling safe, whole, and finally home. Later that night, Olivia sat on the couch in the mansion, staring at her hand. The ring gleamed under the soft light, a symbol of a life she never thought she'd have. Hazel and Harper curled up beside her, sleepily rubbing their eyes. "Mommy?" Harper murmured. "Are we staying here forever?" Olivia's throat tightened. She looked at Logan, who stood nearby, watching them with the kind of tenderness she had only ever dreamed of. She turned back to her daughters, pressing a soft kiss to their foreheads. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "Forever." And for the first time in her life, forever didn't seem so scary anymore. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden rays over the secluded garden of Logan's estate. White roses lined the pathway, their delicate petals fluttering in the gentle breeze. A soft melody from a violin filled the air, blending perfectly with the murmurs of the small, intimate crowd. It was perfect, simple, elegant, everything Olivia had ever dreamed of. She stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a flowing white gown that hugged her figure beautifully, the fabric trailing behind her like a whisper. Her heart pounded against her ribs, not from fear, but from something far deeper. Love. Pure, unwavering love. At the altar, Logan waited. His eyes never left her. And for the first time in her life, Olivia wasn't afraid of love. She embraced it. Harper and Hazel, dressed in matching ivory dresses, giggled as they tossed rose petals along the aisle, their little faces beaming with joy. "Mommy, hurry!" Hazel whisper shouted, waving at her excitedly. Laughter rippled through the guests, but Olivia barely noticed. Her entire world was standing at the altar. Logan Bennett, the man who had saved her, loved her, and given her a home. When she finally reached him, he took her hands in his grip warm, steady, and filled with promise. "Are you ready for forever?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled. "I've never been more ready." Their wedding was small but filled with love, a gathering of close friends, a handful of Logan's trusted employees, and the small family Olivia had never expected to have. When Logan kissed her, the world melted away. It was soft yet powerful, a silent promise that he would always be there, that she would never be alone again. After the ceremony, Olivia found herself standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching Logan kneel beside the twins. "All right, little ladies," he said with mock seriousness. "Who wants to dance with their new dad first?" Harper's eyes widened in realization, her small hands clutching her dress. "You're our daddy now?" she asked softly, looking between Olivia and Logan. A lump formed in Olivia's throat. She opened her mouth to respond, but Logan beat her to it. "If you'll have me," he murmured. Hazel, the quieter twin, stepped forward first, her tiny fingers wrapping around Logan's hand. "I want you to be our daddy," she whispered. Harper nodded quickly, throwing her arms around Logan's neck. "Me too, Daddy. Can we dance now?" Logan froze. For a long second, he didn't speak, didn't move. Then, without a word, he wrapped them both in a fierce hug, burying his face into their soft curls. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. In that moment, she knew Logan wasn't just her husband. He was their father, and their family was finally whole. As the weeks passed, Olivia transitioned into her new role at Bennett Enterprises, balancing her new career, her marriage, and motherhood. It wasn't easy, but Logan never let her struggle alone. He supported her every step of the way, encouraging her, mentoring her, and making sure she had everything she needed to succeed. Olivia no longer felt like she was just existing. She was thriving, and for the first time in her life, she was excited for the future. Months later, on an ordinary evening, Olivia stood in their bedroom, staring at the small white stick in her hand. Positive. Her hands trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed a hand to her stomach, a soft laugh escaping her lips. Another miracle. Logan was in the nursery, reading bedtime stories to Harper and Hazel when Olivia entered, her heart racing. "Logan," she called softly. He turned, his expression instantly filled with concern. "Everything okay?" She took a shaky breath, then handed him the pregnancy test. For a second, he just stared. Then his eyes widened. "Is this?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. A deep breath left his chest, and before she could say another word, he pulled her into his arms. "We're having a baby," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. She nodded against his chest, her heart bursting with happiness. Logan pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. "Thank you," Olivia laughed, confused. "For what?" "For choosing me. For letting me love you." She placed her hands over his. "You were always my home, Logan. I just had to find my way back." Months later, Olivia cradled a tiny baby boy in her arms, his soft, sleepy breaths filling the room. Logan sat beside her on the hospital bed, his arms wrapped around both her and the baby. Harper and Hazel peeked over the edge of the bed, their faces lighting up with excitement. "Mommy, he's so little," Harper whispered in awe. "Can we keep him?" Hazel asked seriously. Laughter rippled through the room. Logan kissed Olivia's forehead, his voice soft yet firm. "This is our forever." And as Olivia looked around at her family, the man who had saved her, the daughters who had given her strength, and the new life in her arms, she realized something. Love had not broken her. It had healed her. And in the end, kindness and love had created a miracle. Her miracle. What did you think about their story? Share Your thoughts in the comments below. Rate this story on a scale from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to follow all our stories and check out more Beyond Words by clicking on the end screen.